Setuf says pronouns are she, her in Spain. Why is it important to be logically consistent?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I wonder if the question requires logical consistency as well, but anyway. Setuf, how's it going?
I'm going good. How are you guys?
Good. You're on with Dan and Mike. What's on your mind?
So I just wanted to find out, like, you just read the question. Like, why is it even important to be logically consistent and not hold contradictory beliefs? Why is that even important?
I guess I would say, the purpose of logic is to input. The purpose of logic is to input true observations in order to come to true conclusions, right? True premises should give us true conclusions, and that kind of helps you build, right? You have to be able to know how a material works in order to build a building out of it. So we have to understand how our methods of finding the world works and if they're consistent in order for us to have consistent observations that come out of it. So that's why logical consistency is important. Otherwise, you can't get anywhere. There's no results that come from just pure randomness that are useful to you, right? So logic is almost instrumental to that end.
Yeah, Setuf, what did you think about that response?
Yeah, I understand it. I was talking more, maybe it's too abstract for me, the example you gave with the building. I'm talking more in terms of morality. Maybe you can give me there an example why it's important, for example, not to discriminate somebody arbitrarily, without any particular reason, just because of how I feel. Maybe you can.
Yeah, hold on, Setuf, hold on. You're taking a left turn because now you're going in. We're talking about logic or like inference rules, right? Because logic is going to be some set of inference rules that you buy into. In logic, there's things like if I accept P, or if I accept P implies Q, and we have P therefore Q, right? That's a structure you can use in argumentation. You can apply that in a syllogism, right? That's logic. When you go to morality, I want to keep it on track before we get there because I'm not a realist for reasons dealing with logic, right? There's a logical issue there. So before we get into like why ought somebody do something in returns to morality, I want to make sure your question is like, why ought we care about proper logical systems? Would that be like the first question that you're essentially asking?
Or is it more like, why ought we care about other people's well-being? I feel like that's where you want to take this, but I could be wrong.
I'm not 100% sure where I want to take it, guys, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But what I really want to boil down to is in terms of morals, in terms of morals, why is it important for me to be, or is it even important for me to be logically consistent in how I apply my morals towards others?
You don't have to be consistent, but if you decide that you recognize well-being and you go, well, I can just disrespect that for other things, then you have no right to complain when I come up and punch you or something, because you've just revoked that as a principle or a value. You can't hold the value and recognize the value and then abandon it when it's convenient, right? So that would be a consistency issue. And if you're like, well, why should I be consistent? Well, then you shouldn't ask any questions when someone comes up to you and starts hurting you under the same principle you employed. And they just go, it doesn't really matter because I can be as inconsistent as I want to you. And you've already abandoned the principle. So it's not a logical issue. This is an issue about being consistent, because I don't think right? This goes back to David Hume's is-ought gap, or the naturalistic fallacy. I don't think you can go from is statements or descriptive statements about the world to prescriptive statements, or what you call normative statements, ways that we should behave, right? So that's a separate logical issue. But if you're saying like, why should I care about well-being or something like that? It's on pain of consistency. If you want to revoke that right, you have no right to now complain when other people do that to you. If that's what you want to do, you can do that. But that's just that's the consequence of abandoning the principle when it suits you.
So in essence, it's only important if I would only have some repercussions from that. If I were to discriminate somebody where I would not have any social repercussions from that, that would be fine.
I'm not understanding the question.
So what you just said, if I understood you correctly, maybe I misunderstood you. You said like it's important to be consistent. Let's say once you value well-being, to be consistent about that, because otherwise you, yeah. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying when you invoke that principle, or you're like, yeah, or you recognize that you care about well-being and what it means to be a conscious creature, and then seemingly decide to forego that principle that is a value to you, and you go, well, I don't want to value that towards other creatures, and you try to say that's some other principle. Well, then that's like, you could do that, but you don't have any basis for when someone comes up to you and just wants to like rip your head off or something, right? Because under the same principle that you think's okay to abandon, they can employ the same thing. That's fine. It's just the consequences that you result yourself into by abandoning something that should respect well-being. If you're just like, well, now I don't care about well-being, I don't know what say in the fight you have anymore, right? Like it seems to be inconsistent.
In other words, right, I think to answer even more directly, in order to uphold a principle of equal consideration of interests, that principle only works if you are also following that equal considerations. Even if it, within your own self-interest, right, it doesn't affect you in any way, right? Like, let's say that you could discriminate against somebody and you have no repercussions of it whatsoever. If you're not following that principle of equal considerations, then it doesn't exist, because it only exists when everybody is following that principle. If everybody is doing it, otherwise, you have no principles. It just doesn't work, right?
Okay, but again, it seems to me like you're saying it's really only important if otherwise I would have some social repercussions from that. Like, let's say for instance, right?
No, it's not social repercussions. This has to do with what you are accepting as a value or a principle, and then seemingly abandoning it, right? If you're just gonna go, I'm okay with half-ass committing to principles, I mean, you're just gonna run into problems anytime you do that, right?
In other words, it stops becoming a principle. Yeah, it wouldn't exist. Like we're simply saying, obviously people in positions of power have discriminated against people with zero repercussions at all, but we still say that they're wrong because they're not following a principle which we deem worthy, which is a universal or equal consideration of interests, right? And so that principle only exists when everybody follows it. If you stop following it, then that principle doesn't exist. You have no principle.
And I'd argue that you do want that principle. I'd argue if I came up and slapped you across the face a couple of times, you would not want that. We could demonstrate that premise. Yes. Not that I want to do anything violent to you. I'm just, for the sake of the argument, but I'm just saying, if somebody had done that, right, then I don't know where you get grounds to complain about the principle they're using, that you've also just decided to abandon, right? It's like they're just being consistent.
Yeah, but let's look, for example, during the slavery time in the U.S., right? People still valued well-being, right? But not of people of African descent. And there were laws, if me as a white person were to kill another white person, I would get punished for that because, we valued that person's right to life.
It's not hard, Setuf. If you just ask the person, right now I'll ask you, do you want to be enslaved? Do you want to be enslaved? No. Okay. Now ask the victim, the actual slave, if they want to be a slave, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yes, but
we all have these are all principles within us that we recognize immediately. The only time people want to go against that is in bullshit conversations of philosophy where they're like, oh, I can just find some reason why I can. No, this is like the way we experience. The only way you try to get out of like, well, actually, I would become someone's slave is if you want to like try to run some philosophical argument just on pain of showing that it's inconsistent or something. But the problem is, look, I disagree with Sam Harris's views, but it's very similar to just put your hand on the hot stove and you can immediately find what's important to you. I don't think that's a logical reason. I don't think you can derive the logical what you should and should not do, but on pain of it being consistent, you can't just go put my hand on the stove and then now it's okay for me to put someone else's hand on the stove when you just recognize that it fucking hurts. right? Like I don't see the consistency there.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying, right? Like that was my initial question. Like, why is it even important? Because the example that I made now with slavery, the society still valued well-being, but were not logically consistent in terms of they were arbitrarily discriminating a certain group and said their well-being is not fine. So I made this example because you said because you don't want to be enslaved yourself, for example, or be beaten. But if that's not even a fear that I should have, why is it even important to be logically consistent with that? And
well, the only conclusion you can draw from that is that they weren't concerned about everybody's well-being, because if they were, they wouldn't have enslaved other human beings. So I don't accept this premise that, oh, they lived in a society where they accepted everybody's well-being. No, they didn't. And now we live in a society that's more consistent with that.
Logically consistent. Yeah, they were not logically consistent, and they did not have any repercussions from that.
I don't. They did suffer. What we stopped having slaves. That was the repercussions. What do you mean they didn't have repercussions from that?
Well, nobody enslaved them or punished them. You know what I'm trying to say? At that
well,
I mean,
like, are you saying that they made it like it did? But that's the whole point that Jmike is saying, is that it doesn't matter if you suffer from it or not. Like, I feel like you're really missing his point,
okay.
Right? It doesn't matter if you even harmed, if you yourself was harmed, if you are causing harm through your actions. Like, that's what's important. Like, I mean, I would say, first of all, yeah, they did. I mean, there was a civil war. A lot of people died. Our American economy was completely overchanged, and pretty much everybody in the country was affected in one way or another, mostly negatively, by that social change. But that had to happen in order for us to live in a more free and equitable society. So I reject the premise that they didn't suffer repercussions, because they certainly did. But even then, it doesn't matter. Our whole point is they weren't living in a free and equitable society. And now we're a bit closer to that. We still got a lot of ways to go, but
yeah,
you know.
I don't understand the point about them not experiencing the consequence. Because, like, if I, off the top of my head, if I was like, could think of a situation where someone goes, I establish legislation of the right to punch or karate chop people, in the face, right? And then they get to go do that to people. And I walked up to them and they've never experienced being karate chopped in the face, and I just go like that, and I stop right there. They're gonna flinch. Right? They're going to, like, even though it hadn't happened to them, they're going to recognize, I don't want this. That's what that means. It's like, I don't want this thing. And if they're recognizing that's a bad thing, that they have to like curl up and try to protect themselves, and they haven't even experienced it, I think that does a lot more damage than any philosophical argument someone could present, because they're just literally endorsing that this is not a good thing that they don't want, that they're imposing on other people. Where's the consistency there? Especially if you recognize that in midst of me wanting to go chop you. You just recognize, oh, the thing I do to other people sucks.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I was just making the example because that's what I thought you were saying with like you don't want the same thing to happen to you. And I was just pointing out, but what if it cannot happen to you? But I do agree with what you are saying. So I just want to ask you then, guys, with that, like, do you think that it is then moral to pay for the animals that we consume to be in slaughterhouses if we wouldn't want that for ourselves?
So short answer is no, I'm a vegan.
Yeah, and short answer here, I do look, I'm a moral subjectivist. I do think it's morally wrong to eat animals. I do eat animals. It's something that I would like to not do. I would like to not contribute to something which to me is horrific, which is factory farming and things like that. But I can still recognize that there's a moral inconsistency in my view, right? But what's the difference? I'm recognizing it and trying to at least make steps towards that. There's a difference between someone just going, yeah, no, it's cool, I can legislate karate chopping people in the face, but even though like I just demonstrated that I don't want it to happen, that's fine. Like, I can just go, I don't want that, but I get to legislate it against you. And then it's just like, everybody looks around and goes, what the hell kind of game is this? Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? It's just an issue of consistency. Nothing to do with logic, because you're never going to logically, this is Hume's point, you'll never logically deduce what you ought to do. You won't even be able to do it for how we ought to conduct science, how we ought to do X, Y, or Z. It doesn't matter. There's no statement that gets you to an ought about anything, because I just don't know how you cash that out. It doesn't mean you can't make sense of the fact that you have a phenomenological state of pain and pleasure and a gradient between the two, what you prefer, your guilt, your empathy towards other people, other people's guilt and empathy. When you package that together, and if you don't see something there, not saying to you, but if someone doesn't, I feel really bad for them, because I don't need a God or independent morals or any of that bullshit to make me a halfway decent person.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I'm just curious then, it's Jmike, not the name?
I'm sorry, you cut out.
Hello? Sorry, I was just saying then, thank you for that, and that's very interesting. Then I'm just curious then, if you do think that it is immoral to pay for animals to get killed for you, why do you keep doing it?
Because I'm an immoral heathen. No, because it's something I've recognized that I haven't been able to capitalize on. I'm a human that makes mistakes. I'm a human that doesn't live through all my promises. I'm a human that doesn't necessarily call my own family back when I should at times, right? There's plenty of things that I want to work at as being a better human being, and that's just one of them. But if I'm just going to stop and kick rocks and go, well, I'm still getting a chicken sandwich, I'll never ever get to the point where I won't, then that doesn't seem, that to me, that route seems worse than, okay, I did something that I regret or that I perhaps feel guilty or recognize as immoral by my own principles. But that should be fuel for me to at least learn from that, because if that compounds guilt on my behalf, then I don't see why I wouldn't want to rid myself of that, right? I don't know why I wouldn't want to fix that. So we're humans, man. We all make mistakes.
Yeah, of course we all make mistakes. But I think if we know better, we should try to do better. So that's why I'm really curious. Like, what is your justification for paying people to kill animals for you personally?
There's no moral justification.
Okay.
Yeah. I like the taste of cheeseburgers. It's an immoral thing.
Okay. So, okay. That's
it.
I don't have
it's simple.
That's it.
Cool.
I guess. All right. Thanks, Setuf. Thank you for your time.
Thank you guys for the nice conversation and the honest conversation. I appreciate it, and enjoy your evening.
You as well. All right. Yeah. So, well, Dan, I'd actually be interested in your perspective as someone who I'm not a vegan. Like, would you prefer the non-vegan to not recognize it, or like, what would your position?
No, I think the recognition of that is the first step. I think it's the first step of the process. And to be frank with you, that doesn't mean that the community has different perspectives on what that path should look like for every individual, right? Mm-hmm. Because the sad fact of reality is, of course, most people can't cut cold turkey. That's just not how it works for most people. Most people, it's a gradual process. If you start by just cutting out dairy products, and then you start by cutting out some other kinds of products, that seems to be a good way to do it. Of course, there's going to be other things you have to run into. If you primarily get one nutritional supplement from this one kind of food, and suddenly you're not eating that, what do you do to replace it? These kinds of questions can come up as you make that transition, obviously. But at least starting on that path is where people should really try. And that doesn't mean that I don't make mistakes either. I ate animal products this morning, it's not great. And so I have to obviously reconcile with that too. But you have to consciously making an effort is always going to be better than not. So.
Sure. I would say that. Yeah. It's kind of like asking this person who smokes cigarettes, like, yeah, but it's bad. And they're like, yeah, I know,
exactly.
I'm aware,
and,
this is hard.
We live in a culture that it has created whole institutions to make it very easy for you to get animal products anywhere you go, and in some places it can be your only options for many periods of time. So there's a lot of systemic reasons why people are, and I think that if we make those changes on an institutional level, people will be willing to do more stuff, and that comes with the accessibility of more not just substitutes, but also just like education on food and health sciences in general.
Sure.
But really just kind of making, those changes where, okay, yeah, maybe this person in this part of the world can't make that change. What can you do in your part of the world? And start by asking yourself that, and just take responsibility for what you can do. Right. So
sure. Yeah.